يا أيها الناس قد جاءتكم موعظة من ربكم وشفاء لما في الصدور وهدى ورحمة للمؤمنين قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending as-salatu was-salam upon our beloved Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In our previous sessions, we went through how many makharij so far? Sorry? Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. 8, correct. 8 makharij so far. So let's revisit them quickly, inshallah, together. First one, Jawf. Second one, Aqsa al-Halq. Third one, Wasat al-Halq. Fourth one, Adna al-Halq. Next one, fifth one, Aqsa al-Lisani. Fawq. And then Aqsa al-Lisani Asfal. And then before the Hafa? Yeah, we finished Aqsa. No, we finished that now. Wasat al-Lisan. And then Hafatul Lisan. Alright? So the last one we did was Hafatul Lisan, which is for which letter? Ad-Dad. Now. طيب. The author next, he says, وَاللَّامُ أَدَنَاهَا لِمُنْتَهَاهَا. The lam is articulated from the nearest part of it, extending to its end point. طيب. And the lam is articulated from the nearest part of it. And this is something which we have to identify what the pronoun is returning back to, the it. لِمُنْتَهَاهَا, to its end point, to the apex of the tongue. طيب, what is meant by أَدَنَاهَا? The nearest part of it. The nearest part of the tongue. Alright, so Adna al-Lisan. Is that what it is? What is Adna al-Lisan? Yeah, the front of the tongue. So if we split up the tongue into 3 halves, the back half is, into 3 thirds. The back third is Aqsa al-Lisan. The middle third is Wasat al-Lisan, and the front third is Adna al-Lisan. But that is an incorrect answer. It doesn't return back to the tongue. What does it return back to?
The edge.
The edge, صح. Adna hafatul lisan. So it means, comes from the nearest part of the edge of the tongue. What does that mean? We'll show in the pictures, inshallah. All right. Basically, the front third of the tongue, the makhraj of it is the edge of that. All right. It's the edge of the front third of the tongue. Make sense? All right. So we'll find a few quotes from scholars who have mentioned this specifically, such as, for example, Ibn Al-Jazariyyah himself. He mentions this. Those before him also, many tajweed scholars from before him also mentioned this, such as Makki ibn Abi Talib. He says, وَهِيَ تَخْرُجُ مِنْ حَافَةِ اللِّسَانِ أَدَنَاهَا إِلَى مُنْتَهَى طَرَفِهِ. it comes out from the edge of the tongue, adnaha, its front portion, all right, it's adna part, ila muntaha tarafi, until the apex, the end point of its tip. As in, right here, the tip, right at the end, right at the front of the tongue, up to there. So as in basically saying, the front edge of the tongue, basically. All right? Something similar has been mentioned by Abu Amr al-Dani. He says, وَاللَّامُ مِنْ أَدْنَى حَافَةِ اللِّسَانِ إِلَى مَا يَلِيهَا مِنَ الْحَلَكِ الْأَعْلَى مِمَّا فُوَيْقَ الضَّاحِكِ وَالنَّابِ وَالرُّبَاعِيَّةِ وَالثَّنِيَّةِ. He says the lam is from the front edge of the tongue. أدنى حافة اللسان إلى ما يليها من الحنك الأعلى. And it connects with that which is adjacent to it from the top palate. All right, from the top palate. He says that which is just behind some of the teeth that are in that region, the dahik and the nab and the ruba'iyya and the thaniyya. All right, so basically the front kind of teeth. All right, not the back teeth, but towards the front, those portion of the teeth.
He used صيغة المؤنث because لسان المؤنث أدناها.
حافة. أدناها. ها حافة. حافة is مؤنث. حافة is feminine.
اللسان ليس مؤنث.
عفوا؟
اللسان ليس مؤنث.
اللسان usually, Allahu A'lam, I'll have to check, but usually those parts of the body where there's two of them, they're usually mu'annath. And the parts where there's only one of them is usually mudhakkar. All right? But Allahu A'lam, I need to check that one, particular one. I'm not sure. But in any case, the dhamir is returning back to hafa. It's not returning back to al-lisan. All right? طيب. And one of the scholars, he quotes from Abu Hayyan al-Andalusi, from his teacher Abu Ali ibn Abil Ahwas al-Andalusi. He mentions which side does it come from? Right? How we said dad, we said the left side is easier, and then some people can pronounce it from the right side, or will pronounce it from the right side. And then some people, very rare, they will pronounce it from both sides. Similarly, with the lam, it's kind of the opposite. That it's easier to pronounce it from the right side, and some people will be able to pronounce it from the left side, right? But there's more takalluf, there's more effort to pronounce it from the left side. And then it's even more rare for it to be pronounced from both sides. طيب. So this is in regards to وَاللَّامُ أَدْنَاهَا لِمُنْتَهَاهَا. Clear, inshallah? طيب. Yes?
Muntaha is also referring back to Hafatul.
No, it goes back to the taraful lisan. I mean, it could return back to the tongue, or it could return back to taraful lisan. All right? Or it could return possibly back to hafatul lisan. Wallahu alam. But most of them have said to the apex of the taraful lisan. All right? As has been quoted by many of the earlier scholars. Wallahu alam. طيب. Next, he moves on to the next letter. And we'll group these three together. Why? Because some of the scholars have mentioned these three letters as coming from the same makhraj. Al-lam, al-noon, and al-ra. Now, طيب. So we'll mention the abiyat first, then we'll show the images or the diagrams of these three letters after that. He says after that, وَالنُّونُ مِنْ طَرَفِهِ تَحْتُ جَعَلُوا. Make the noon from its tip below. That should be not is, but from its tip below. وَالنُّون مِنْ طَرَفِهِ is from the tongue's tip. And when we say tip, that's a very loose translation, because tip, when we talk about taraf in Arabic, or specifically in this field, when we say taraful lisan, it doesn't just refer to like just that point right at the end of your tongue. It refers to basically a portion of the front of the tongue. Not as big as adna lisan, but it's basically the end of the tongue, a portion of the end of the tongue. And we'll show that in the diagram, inshallah. Tahtu. Tahtu, we've mentioned this before. What does tahtu here refer to? Tahtu? Similar to asfal. What does he mean when he says asfal? When he says fawq and asfal, which direction is he referring to? Yeah, but how, yani where? Sorry? Under the lamb, yeah, but
The tongue, the teeth.
what does he mean by below?
The tongue will be lower
Lower than what?
than the lab. Where it is the lab.
Towards the opening of the mouth. Yes, good. So when he says below and when he says above, he doesn't literally mean how we're looking at the directions like up and down, like that. He means basically above being further back, further inside the mouth, and then below being further towards the lips, further towards the exit. So when he says tahtu, it means further forward on the tongue. All right? Just like when he says, وَالْقَافُ أَقْصَى اللِّسَانِ فَوْقُ, the qaf is from the back portion of the tongue. فَوْقُ means further back. And then ثُمَّ الْكَافُ أَسْفَلُ. And then kaf, which is below that, which means further forward. All right? That is, and perhaps this might come in one of your assessments. So make sure you know that, inshallah, what he means by that. Ij'alu. He's made the structure of the sentence a bit different here. Perhaps for the wazn, the scale or the meter of the line of poetry. But it should be Ij'alu an-nun min tarafihi tahtu. But he says وَالنُّونُ مِنْ طَرَفِهِ تَحْتُ إِجْعَلُوا. Alright, so that should be at the start of the sentence, the إِجْعَلُوا. Make it. Alright? إِجْعَل means to make something. So here he means articulate it or make it from its tip. And this has been mentioned by scholars who have explained Al-Jazariyyah. Like for example, in Al-Hawashi Al-Azhariyah, from a scholar from 905, he passed away, Khalid Al-Azhari, rahmatullahi alayhi, he says, وَهُوَ أَخْرَجُ مِنْ مَخْرَجِ اللَّامِ. It is further outwards than the makhraj of lam. As in it's further towards the lips. Further, it's closer to the lips than the lam. That's what is meant by tahtu. He's explaining what is meant by tahtu. And as we know, an-nun has two elements to it. It has an element of the tongue, and then there's another element which is, does anyone know? Naam, the khayshum, the nasal passage, which we will show inshallah. And when we say the makhraj of nun also, we include with that at-tanween. That's been mentioned by Makki ibn Abi Talib. He says, وَفِيهَا إِذَا سَكَنَتْ that's been mentioned by Al-Imam Al-Ju'buri. He says, وَذَلِكَ يَشْمَلُ التَّنْوِينَ أَيْضًا. Because tanween essentially is nun with sukun. That's why we group the rules of a-nun, as-sakina with tanween together. Right? Because both are the same sound. An, in, un is the same as hamza with a noon sakin after, pronouncing it as an in un, is the same as with the tanween. They're both the same sound. طيب. Next, he says وَالرَّا يُدَانِيهِ لِظَهْرٍ أَدْخَلُوا. وَالرَّا يُدَانِيهِ لِظَهْرٍ أَدْخَلُوا. And the ra is near to it, further inward from its top surface. And the ra, يُدَانِيهِ, is near to it. دَانَ الشَّيْء, alright, means to become near to. Alright, يُدَانِيهِ means something has become near to something else. So is near to it, near to the articulation point of the noon, which was previously mentioned. He says, لِظَهْرٍ أَدْخَلُوا, further inward from its top surface. This particular phrase here has been discussed a little bit in terms of what does that mean even. Because a lot of the tajweed scholars from early times, they have mentioned this phrase here, which is from its visible portion, it is more inside. Dhahr, meaning zahir, which is the opposite of batin, or batin or batin, right? That's why the batin is called batin, because it's inside you, right? The batin meaning the stomach, right? It's called batin because it's inside you, right? So from its visible surface, it is further inside. Adkhalu means further inside. طيب, what does this mean? Sorry? No. So, let me give an example of what we mean by zahir and batin. All right? Zahir means basically the outer surface of your body. Batin is the inner surface, the side which is not seen by, which is not facing the people. Right? When it comes to the hands, they say this part, right, of your hand is the zahir, and the palm is the batin. Alright? And so on. Things which are facing towards people is called the zahir, and then things which are facing the opposite way would be the batin. Like for example, your teeth, there's a front which is facing towards people, that would be the zahir of your teeth. And then the batin of it would be the portion which is facing the inside of your mouth. Alright? So, could someone get the door, please? So what is he talking about, Aslan? What is he talking about? What do you think he's talking about? The teeth. The tongue. Ahsant. Good. So which portion of the tongue is the visible portion, and which portion is the top? Yeah. This part is the visible portion. طيب, so he's saying it is further inside from the tongue. Then what? Then which one? Then the lam. Then the noon. The previous one, which is the noon. Alright? It's further inside on the tongue. طيب. Now, we know that Ibn Al-Jazariyyah rahmatullahi alayhi is ordering these makharij in that order, right? He's going from inside to outside. طيب, so why is he mentioning this then? He's saying himself that this is further inside but then he is also arranging it after the noon. Right? And this is where this discussion of what does it even mean come about. So who can explain it?
Maybe it was
On the top palate,
Yes.
on the inside, then noon.
Uh-huh.
Whereas on the tongue, it is
Further outside.
further outside, on the tongue, to the noon.
The opposite. But you're on the right track. The opposite though. He's saying on the zahr, on the visible portion of the tongue, it is further inside. Whereas, now what makes it after the noon is the fact that on the top palate, it's going to be slightly more forward. Alright? So that's why he's arranged it after the noon. Does that make sense? We'll show it in the image, inshallah.
Can you explain it again, sir?
Naam. So there's two parts which are meeting, right? When you're pronouncing the letter. There's a tongue and there's a top palate. Right? The tongue is meeting with the top palate, with the roof of your mouth. Alright? So basically what the explainers of Jazariyyah have mentioned is that what is implied here is that on the tongue, it's not more forward than the noon. It is further back, further inside on the tongue. However, on the top palate, it is further forward. That's what makes it after the noon in terms of the arrangement of the makhraj. But in terms of the tongue, it is further inside. He's trying to point that out. Make sense? Okay. Fadda.
But isn't the makhraj, the part of the makhraj that is being spoken about is the tongue?
Yes, I mean we can do it either way. That's why some of the scholars they will arrange the ra first and then they will put the noon, or they will put the noon first and they will put the ra next. So not all of them will be arranging it that way. So it's kind of like just a technical thing. It's a technical thing where that's where we're arranging it that way because of this, and others will say we'll arrange it this way because of this. Make sense? طيب. So Ibn al-Hajib rahmatullah alayhi says, just to elaborate on this further, he says ألا ترى أنك إذا نطقت بالنون والراء ساكنين وجدت طرف اللسان عند النطق بالراء فيما هو بعد مخرج النون. Alright? وهذا هو الذي يجده المستقيم الطبع، وقد يمكن إخراج الراء مما هو أدخل من مخرج النون ومن مخرجها، ولكن بتكلف لا على حسب إجراء ذلك على الطبع المستقيم، والكلام في المخارج إنما هو على حساب استقامة الطبع لا على التكلف. So Ibn al-Hajib, he explains that the noon, the ra, according to the natural state of people, when they pronounce it, they will pronounce it further forward than the noon. The ra, they will pronounce it from further forward than the noon. That's what's the normal thing which is there in most people. When they try to pronounce it in a natural way, in an easy way, without any takalluf, without any overburdening. So he explains this, and then another scholar, he explains this further, and he says, Muhammad al-Mar'ashi rahmatullahi alayh, he says, كون مخرج الراء أدخل في ظهر اللسان من مخرج النون ووضع مخرج الراء مع ذلك بعد مخرج النون في ترتيب المخارج بقوله ظهر اللسان أدخل من رأسه وما يلابسه رأسه من اللثة بعد مخرج النون، فمن نظر إلى الأول يظهر له جعل مخرج الراء قبل مخرج النون، ومن نظر إلى الثاني أخر الراء عن النون والله أعلم. You understood that? So those who, he basically explains what I just explained. Those who looked at the makhraj, the ordering of the makhraj, in terms of the position of the tongue, all right, they will put the ra first, and then they will put the noon next. And those who looked at it from the perspective of where it meets with the top palate, all right, that would be further forward for the ra. So they would put the noon first, if they are considering that, and they would put the ra next. Alright, so it just depends on the perspective that they're looking at. That is basically what he has explained in one of his books. So is that, inshallah, that's clear, right? That the noon comes first in terms of the top palate, and the ra comes next in terms of the top palate. But if we're looking at the tongue, the noon comes first, the ra comes first, further inward, and then the noon comes closer to the tip of the tongue, or the apex of the tongue. طيب. But in any case, some of the scholars have even said the noon and the ra on the top palate are so close it's almost indistinguishable. It's almost indistinguishable. Even that further forward of the ra that we are describing on the top palate, that's very minute, very, very minute. طيب. Let's look at some of the diagrams so things will become a bit clearer, inshallah. Ninth articulation point is adana hafatul lisan. Adana hafatul lisan, the edge of the anterior or front portion of the tongue. So, that's an image of the lam in its usual position when it is light. All right, when it is a light letter. And this would be lam when it would be a heavy letter. What do you notice the difference? Sorry? The back of the tongue is raised for that heavy lam. What do you mean by heavy lam? Where is the heavy lam? Lafzul jalala. No. Lafzul jalala. No. Just lafzul jalala. Unless you're reciting warsh. Warsh, if there's sad and ta before it, if there's sad or ta before it, no, then it is heavy. Sad or ta with a fatha. Yeah, no. As-salah, no. No. So that's warsh. Warsh has different rules for lam and ra. Right, both of them, he has different rules for that. طيب. So we can see that it's a bit further back than the teeth, right? Slightly further back than the teeth. In terms of where you will see the contact from the tongue, you can see if we split the tongue into 3 halves, this is for the lam, all right? This is the back third. Middle third, that's the center, wasatul lisan. And then you've got the front third, which is the yellow portion. Right? Not that red thing there, but that yellow portion. Alright, so it's the edge of that yellow portion. Alhamdulillah. So it's the edge of the front third of the tongue. Those are the pressure points. And then you can see it's a bit further back than the teeth. Right? So it's kind of like in your gums somewhere. It's a little bit further back than the teeth. You don't have the details there on your diagram, so make sure that you're just pointing it out on your diagrams, inshallah. طيب. طيب مهدي. When is لفظ الجلالة heavy?
Sorry?
When is لفظ الجلالة, the lam, heavy?
Preceded by a fatha.
No.
And or a dhamma.
Or a dhamma, no. If it's preceded by kasra, then it would be light, no. طيب, moving on. The 10th articulation point, which is طرف اللسان وما فوق الثنايا العليا. The periphery or tip of the tongue with its adjacent point on the top palate, behind the top incisors. Again, we're still behind the top incisors. We haven't reached the incisors yet. So, articulation of noon. You can see what's happening is that the sound gets trapped on the tongue. So if you notice right now, when you pronounce an, right? And I think we've explained this before. If we pronounce an, the air has no way to go out of your mouth. Right? Why? Because the tongue is blocking it. The tongue is pressed against the top palate, and that's blocking the air and the sound from coming out. So what does the air do? It finds an alternative path, which is to come out through the nasal passage. That is what we call ghunna. Alright, that's why when we close our nose and we try to pronounce the noon, we will not be able to. Especially when it has shadda, or especially when it has sukoon. Alright? In terms of the tip of the tongue is that red portion at the front. Alright? It is a bit less of a portion of the tongue than the adna al-lisan. Adna al-lisan, we said, is the front third. Whereas this is just, you can say the tip, the edge, the periphery, this front portion, a little bit of the front portion. And as we mentioned, the noon is further forward on the tongue. Whereas, let's just compare, okay? So, I'll come back to this. But with the, I hope that's clear. With the ra, you can see that the point of contact is a bit further back. Alright, it's not as forward as the noon. So it's a little bit further back, whereas a noon is a little bit further forward. Alright? And then point of contact, as mentioned for the noon, will be a bit further forward than the lam. But it will not reach the incisors also. We said noon, the tongue blocks the sound, right? And then what about lam? What happens with the lam? You're going to ask that question.
The vocal cords that.
There's a little gap around the side.
Hey.
It is gap, yeah.
No. This is what we'll call inhiraf. We'll learn about the sifa in the next bab. One of the characteristics of lam and ra is they have inhiraf, which means that the air finds no way of going through the portion where it's supposed to go through, so it finds an alternate pathway. With the lam, it comes from the sides, yes, correct. Comes from the sides of the tongue. Whereas with the ra, there should be a bit of gap in the center of the tongue, and it comes through that. Alright? But that's called inhiraf, where the air is forced to go through another way because it is blocked through the point on the makhraj.
But isn't noon and lam very similar in makharij?
Very, yes.
And noon actually blocks it completely.
Yeah.
Yet lam actually, the sound passes through.
Allahu a'lam.
And also I was thinking, if you use the edge, this is something that I've been teaching before as well. If you use the edge of the tongue for lamb, then you tend to make it heavy.
Okay. Yep. Okay. But we're using one edge, sir.
Yes.
We're using one edge. And also heaviness and lightness is not to do with the front of the tongue, aslan.
It is, but if you try and try to use the edge, it's sort of lifting your tongue.
Possibly, but it's not the back edge, aslan. So it's the back edge of the tongue would be more relaxed, whereas it's the front edge of the tongue which would be more lifted. No. طيب. Then we have Ra. Again, very similar to the Noon in terms of the makhraj. Heavy Ra and then light Ra. The default with Lam is that it's light, right? And then heaviness in the Lam is the exception, right? With the Ra, it's the opposite. The default on Ra is that it's heavy, but it can also come light in certain situations. Right? صح Muhammad? No? Kasra. Good. No. There's rules. There's a whole bab in this in Jazariyyah. We'll go through it in detail, inshallah. We'll go through a lot of practice with that because there's a rule, and then there's an exception to the rule, and then there's an exception to the exception. So we'll go through everything, inshallah. And as you can see, it's a bit further back on the tongue, and it's kind of a little bit further forward on the top palate. Yani, it's very negligible, aslan. On the top palate, very slight maybe forward for the Ra. Does anyone remember any of the names of the scholars who grouped the Noon, Lam and Ra as the same makhraj? No. A good try there. Good try. One of the scholars of language also. Sorry? Farahidi, Khalil ibn Ahmed? No. Not Khalil ibn Ahmed. Yeah, it's not important, aslan. Yani. The opinion is more important than the names. But it's Al-Farra. Right, Al-Farra. Who grouped the three together. طيب. Important points regarding the articulation of Lam, Noon and Ra. Just a few pointers, a few cautionary things as we usually do. Number one, it is necessary to make the Lam sakin clear when followed by a Noon, as the two letters are very close in their articulation point and tend to merge when not giving attention. So like for example, أرسلنا, سلنا. The Lam and the Noon very close in their makhraj. So we tend sometimes to go أرسلنا, أرسلنا or something like that. جعلنا, أسلنا, أنزلنا, أضللنا. and so on. Some of these, if we were to merge, they would change the meaning entirely, right? Like zayyalna and zayyanna. If we were to merge that, it's completely different meanings. Now, one thing that's noticed is that lam sometimes tends to become heavy when it is placed beside other heavy letters. All right? So we have to pay attention to not making the lam heavy, especially when it is followed by a heavy letter. So like for example, ta'ala Allahu, ta'ala Allah, la, ta'ala Allahu. So we have to make it light when it's, even if it's followed by heavy letters. Even if it's followed by a heavy lam, right? ما أنزل الله اللطيف خلقنا.
Light, it means tarqiq, right?
ترقيق, no. Yeah. And these points, subhanAllah, and some of them may be important for us. Maybe it might not be important for us, right? Because we might already have them sorted out. But it is also very beneficial when teaching those who are learning to recite. Because you can say the majority of these that I'm mentioning here, I come across them on a daily basis, teaching students who are going through the Qa'ida and things like that. You come across that on a daily basis. So it's good to be aware of these errors, and it's good to be aware of how we would correct those errors also. How we would try and work with those errors to fix them. Because at the end of the day, over here, one of our aims is to be able to recite ourselves correctly, but also we say أن يقرأ ويقرئ, right? The person is given permission to recite and to teach the recitation. Right? So that should be one of the aims, because خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. طيب. Next, noon should be articulated clearly if it appears more than once, whether it be within one word or multiple words, whether it is geminated, meaning mushaddad, has shadda, or not, as the letter can tend to become hidden if care is not applied. Sorry? You don't have to, the notes that you do, you don't have to write it exactly write it in your own words, write it briefly. SubhanAllah, something comes to mind when it comes to note-taking. In our first term, okay? First term in Jamia, in Saudi. We were still, still trying to sort out our Arabic, yani, trying to get it 100%, you know. The first term we had a teacher who, he started off the lessons and he was just talking. Nothing written on the board, just talking, just speaking. The knowledge was just being spoken. And not only that, speaking very, very fast. Very, very fast. Yani it's like, almost like, you know, when you ask yourself, it's almost like you think, is he doing it on purpose, or yani, it's almost like he's doing it on purpose, trying to speak really fast. And subhanAllah, many of the students, they started complaining, right? That we can't take the notes and things like that, and we're not able to follow along. Is there some notes, like ready-made notes? Because that was usually the habit, you know? They would have ready-made notes and you'd go and buy it in one of those things, the photocopying place. So he said, these were his words, okay? He said, there's no notes. Anything which is coming in the exam is all the stuff I've said from my mouth. Anything I've said from my mouth. And then they asked, is there any books that we can refer to? No books. Just anything that I say, that is what is coming in the exams. You make your own mudhakkara. You make your own notes. And that's your mudhakkara. And inshallah, by the end of the term, you'll have a ready-made mudhakkara, and in years to come, you'll be able to refer back to that. And then he gave us some advice about, you know, like having our own notes and trying to be able to summarize and things like that. And subhanAllah, that term taught us a lot about how to do our notes and writing things briefly and trying to follow along whilst listening at the same time, trying to write notes whilst listening at the same time. But subhanAllah, these days it's AI and we have all these other things to help us, yet we still struggle. And these are things that we need to try and develop, you know, how to take notes and how to write at the same time as the teacher is explaining something. Being able to listen and being able to write, being able to summarize, being able to even, sometimes what you have to do is you have to write things in short in ways that you would understand, right? If someone was to read it, maybe they might not understand, but for yourself, maybe you write it in some short form which you can understand, right? You use different methods and different ways to try and take your notes, inshallah. طيب, so examples of noon which is repeated. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ نَحْنُ نُحْيِي بِأَعْيُنِنَا. So where noon is repeated, it's important to ensure that each noon is pronounced clearly and audibly. طيب. A few more points. It is necessary to hide the takrir or the takrar that occur in the ra, especially when it has a shadda. However, it should not be omitted entirely either, as this results in not pronouncing the ra clearly. So there's two extremes when it comes to the ra. One of them is slightly worse. One of those extremes is slightly worse. One extreme is, they will say, we have to omit the qarar altogether from the ra, right? And the reality is you can't omit the takrar from the ra unless you distance the tongue from the top palate entirely and you don't pronounce the ra in its actual, audible form. in its proper form. So you'll say something like ar-rah, ar-rah. You'll distance it entirely such that you won't be able to hear the ra aslan. Right? And that's a worse mistake. That's a worse extreme. Another extreme is overemphasizing the takrar and doing it completely and fully. Especially when there's shadda on it. Ar-rah, ar-rah. Right? Even though there are some scholars to this day, some major Qur'an, who have taken this view. So this is, you can say, a view, which is there, which there is some backing for it, right? From some of the earlier scholars. But in terms of omitting the takrar entirely, that is a misapplication and a misunderstanding of some of the texts which have come from the scholars of Tajweed. The middle ground, which is the view that is supported by many of the scholars and which we'll find in their books, many of the reputable scholars, including Imam Ibn Al-Jazariyyah, where he says, you'll memorize it shortly inshallah, وَأَخْفِ تَكْرِيرًا إِذَا تُشَدَّدُ, is that you hide it as much as you can. As in, you limit its the sound of the takrar as much as you can. And the reason for the takrar is the blockage of the air. If you stick the tongue more firmly on the top palate, it will do more takrar. But if you leave a little bit of space in the center of the tongue, then you'll be able to limit the takrar. So you limit the takrar. You don't omit it entirely, all right? But you limit it. And you don't do it excessively either. You try to hide it as much as you can. Ar-rah, ar-rah. You can hear it, right? You can hear a little bit of takrar, but you're trying to hide it as much as you can. And it's also not ar-rah, ar-rah. That is, now I'm taking it off the top palate entirely. Not ar-rah, it's not in a spot. It's not on the makhraj, aslan. Right? So not ar-rah. You don't want to make it sound like you're on a helicopter. You know? And not the other extreme either. But in the middle. Ar-rah, ar-rah. So you're trying to leave a bit of space, right? And you're trying to limit it as much as you can. Now generally when teaching, it's okay, and this is something that I've found to be beneficial, it's okay to teach someone with the takrar initially, so that they're able to find the makhraj. And then you teach them to limit it after that. And I do that for two reasons. Number one, because it is a more valid view than not putting on the makhraj entirely. It's still a more valid view than not putting on the makhraj entirely. And the second reason is because it allows a person to do it step by step, to achieve the goal of finding the makhraj and also limiting the takrar step by step. All right?
Some people, they cannot pronounce ra.
Yeah.
Many people,
Nah, yeah, صح. No.
they have weakness in their
Yeah.
tongue.
Sometimes it's also a tongue tie, what they call tongue tie.
Yeah.
They're not able to actually, yeah. No. Sometimes those things can be alleviated with practice, but other times it requires, other times it's not, it's like a person is not able to do anything about it. No. طيب. So that's in regards to the takrar, but we'll discuss it. This is just very brief, but we'll discuss it when we come to at-takrar in Bab al-Sifat, inshallah. It is also necessary to ensure the ra is differentiated from the lam when the lam follows it, as the two letters have a very close articulation point and sound. Like, for example, وَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ. Bir li. Right? It's very easy to merge the two letters. وَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ. No. أَنِشْكُرْ لِي أَنِشْكُرْ لِي أَنِشْكُرْ لِي. Right? That's merging. So you have to make sure that the two are separated. Unless you're reading Susi, of course.
Sushi, it's different.
Susi has أوسع الروايات في باب الإدغام. It's got the most amount of idghams between the وَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ. Nice and easy. طيب, it is also necessary to be aware of the rules of heaviness and lightness in regards to the ra, as this letter applies each in different situations. It applies heaviness and lightness in different situations. And there's a whole bab on that, as we mentioned, coming up later on, inshallah. Bab al-Qira'aat. I would have hoped to get into the next makhraj, but it looks like we're not going to have enough time for it. No. Khair. طيب, any questions? Yes.
Have you light in وَأَصَلْنَا لَهُ عَيْنَ الْفِطْرِ?
Wajhan. Two, yeah. So, let me just summarize it real quick. All right? So, ra, if it has a fatha or a dhamma, heavy. Kasra, heavy. Light, sorry. Making sense so far? All right. It has a sukoon, you look at what's before it. If what's before it is a fatha or dhamma, then it will be heavy. If what is before it is a kasra, then it will be light. طيب, if the letter before it is sukoon, the same thing apply it to the letter before it. Fatha, dhamma, heavy. Kasra, light. Alright? With the exceptions of certain things. With the exception of, for example, if there is sukoon, preceded by kasra, but the letter in between which has a sukoon is a heavy letter, then wajhan. Then two ways. If it is preceded by a kasra, followed by a heavy letter, then heavy. If it has fatha or dhamma, the heavy letter after. If it has a kasra, which is one place in the Qur'an, then it will be heavy or light. Firuqin. That's wajhan. Firqin, firuqin. Alright? In brief. Right? And then there's a few other exceptions also. Actually, one more exception, which is where there is a ya which is mahdhuf. Right? وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِي. Its asl is yasri. Right? So, because its asl is a ya, and it's a kasra when you're continuing, then there's wajhan also. Yasr, yasr. Alright?
Wajhan meaning heavy or light?
Heavy or light, no. But we'll go through there, inshallah, when we come. But that's just, so you have a big diagram in your. Oh yes, that's another exception. No, that's another exception. If the letter before it is a ya sakina, then that takes a position of a kasra. Like for example, khayr. Because even though it's a sakin technically, and the letter before it is a fatha, but the ya acts as a kasra almost. So instead of saying khayr, you're going to say khayr, tayr. Okay? But anyway, we'll do plenty of practice of that when we come to the bab, inshallah. Any other quick question before we leave? طيب سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
ورتل القرآن ترتيلا.